Okay, so from here, if I just continue down, we're then adding some shadows. Now at the moment the lights inside a Nuke don't support any form of shadowing, but there's many ways that we can get shadows, kind of fake shadows that works just fine. So I've just picked off a Skyline image here. This has just come straight off of Google Images, and I've cropped it down, and I've pulled a key on this sky using the IBK keyer. It's probably a bit of a heavy-handed way to do it, but I've pulled the matte, and I don't know whether people have visited the Foundry's website recently, but there's a new video on there that explains how the IBK keyer works, and it is very good, very clever keying system. I'm then adding a Bezier here just to get rid of some additional noise, because we obviously have some blue reflections in the windows. So in the alpha channel, it just cleans that out. I probably should have done this part over here, but I knew this wasn't going to be on the building, so I left it. I'm then, if I just go back to my RGB, I'm then just transforming that, stretching it up, and I'm this time projecting this. So this is a light-based camera projection onto my geometry. So if we just run that up, you can see there is my reverse shadow on our building. And once I flip that around and blurred it, we're getting this, okay? So then what I'm doing is I'm shuffling this into a matte, a special matte called Shadows. Now inside of Nuke, if you're unaware, there is, in many systems you have obviously RGB and alpha running through your composite. But in Nuke we've got over 1,000 channels that can be used, that you can fill up with any number of things. So as an example, I have here a Nuke logo, and I have a Bezier that I've just drawn around this central part here. Now what I'm doing is, in the output of the Bezier, instead of just outputting it onto the alpha or the RGB channels, I'm saying output that Bezier into a channel that I've made called matte. And then I've made in that layer, I've made a channel called logo, okay? So we basically have put into a pipe the information from this mask or this Bezier. I can then come down to this blur node, and if I put this on, you can see that the blur node is only set to blur where the matte is that I've made. So if I put that on, you can see that's working just where that Bezier is. So if I came down a bit lower and put a grade node in here, and I just said gained this up, you can see the whole image is changing, but I could say now just affect the coloring based on the matte that I made here. So instead of dragging another output from here and connecting it to the grade, I can simply come into my masks, come down to my matte logo, and there you can see immediately it's keeping that data, that information, and I'm only affecting the color correction based on that information that I've stored. So if you imagine doing an entire composite and having lots of roto shapes all saved inside your composite that you can pull out at any time, it just makes the whole flow much neater and easier to kind of navigate. So that's what I'm doing. I'm adding that shadow effect that we saw here into our main flow that I've been making, and I'm simply grading the building based on that shadow information. So if we come to here, you can see this dark area is literally me gaining down the whole image based only on where that matte was we made. So if I turn this off, we get color correction across the whole building. When I use that matte, we get it only there. Okay? Now, we spoke at the beginning about the fact that the scanline renderer could output different passes. One of the passes that I'm outputting is the Z information. And if we just come back to our viewer here, we can view different layers and different channels. So we've just looked at our shadow layer. I can also look at my depth layer. So this is the Z depth information coming out of the Skyline renderer much further up the tree. So I'm going to use this information to do a couple of things. I'm going to use it to add a very slight bit of fog into the scene, and I'm also going to use it to add depth of field in a moment. So let's just go back and view the RGB channel. And here is my fog setup. So what I've basically done is I've made a black constant color. I'm adding the Z depth information, or the depth information, into it, doing a very slight grade, none of which you can see. It's all under this depth information here. But then I'm using that with this noise filter. So I'm masking out the noise based on that Z depth information. So when I look at that, we're getting this kind of noise almost through the depth that we had from the Skyline renderer. And then I'm just adding that on top of our scene. Now, a lot of the nodes inside of Nuke have the ability to mix or blend how much of the effect you're getting. So for this fog, I've made it really light. It's only 0.01. If I crank this right up to 1, you can see it really makes the whole thing look like London on a bad day. But I can drop that to whatever I want. So it's just a way of kind of defining how much of a merge or how much of a color correction is actually getting through to your image or your composite. Okay, from here, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm slightly changing the depth information yet again. You can see it's very slightly different, probably not showing up on the monitor, on the screen. And I'm using that then to blur the whole of the image based on that Z depth information. So we're basically just adding lens blur. Now I've done this quite heavy-handed, so you can see, if we crank it right up, you can see that we can keep this bit reasonably in focus and blur out a lot of the background. How you set this is very much up to you. You've got the ability to adjust the depth of field, how much blur is taking place, over what distance. So if I just run this up, you can see where we've got to so far. So this is with the grime and the shadow, and then our fog and our depth of field added. No, I did it on the wrong one. Hold on. It's this one. That's a bit quicker. Okay, so if I run this. As you can see, it's all beginning to come together now. Okay, so the final few things I'm doing are a general grade over the whole shot. So I've just color corrected it. I'm then doing a grade based just on this foreground building. And one of the things that I did that I didn't show you at the beginning was that when I output the foreground building, I again put this alpha channel into a matte. So we can come down here to somewhere, it should be in here if I can see it. There we go. So that whole building here is in a layer, in a channel on its own. So that enables us to grade this building just separately to everything else. Okay, so another useful thing you can do. We also took the output from the Skyline renderer that was giving us the motion vectors, and they enabled us to define motion blur in the scene. And the vector blur node inside of Nuke enables us to then utilize that. So if I put that on, what you'll see, again, quite heavy-handed, so you can see it on the screen, is motion blur based on the camera movement. Okay. I finally then just added some grain to the shot, done a crop and a reformat just to get it to the final image, which if I just call up here, you can see what this is looking like once it loads in. Okay, so there's our final. Make a number of tweaks if we were doing this properly, so make everything a little bit more subtle, but you can see the end result. Okay, so this is everything that I wanted to show you in this scene, but there's more in regards to the integration between Nuke and Maya that I was interested in showing you. If we look over here, we have a very simple scene again, which is just of a straightforward sphere that's been created with the Nuke sphere node here. And it's just being textured with this checkerboard texture. Now, what we can do is we can output this, this geometry straight out of Nuke as a OBJ object. And that's what I'm doing here. I've simply said, write out this geometry as an OBJ. Just give it a name. I can execute it. If the object is moving or changing in some way, we can write those out as sequential OBJs. But I just want to output just a single piece of geometry. So I've done that, and that's done. Now what we also have is, if I just pop this over here, we also have a camera in our scene. And what I can do is I can obviously animate this camera inside of Nuke. So say I bring the camera over here, and I just add some keyframes. So let's set this to a position of 5 in the Z, and then I just animate it to move up and down. So I'm going to right click and set a key, and at frame, let's say 50, I'm going to move it up, and then at frame 70, I'm going to move it down. Okay, and over here we can see, if I just bring this up, this is our graph editor, we can see that we've got that curve taking place. And when we then play our animation, we get what you would expect. Okay, nothing too clever there. What we can do is we can take this data and we can now export this as a CHAN file. And CHAN is, before FBX was around, it was one of the main ways of moving data in and out of Nuke. So I'm just going to save this out, and I'm just going to pop it in here. I'll call it camera move 2, so you know I haven't rigged this. Okay, so that's gone. I'm then going to transition back into Maya, and let's just make a new scene. Don't save. Let's put my grids back on. Now I can import that OBJ file. So let's just have a look. Where did I put it? In fact, I don't think it output. I think I got an error and thought I'd output it. So let's just get this right. Just call this bool OBJ. Okay, so I should have written that out. And re-import that. Upper folder. Should be seeing it, but I'm not. It's probably. Oh, right, yeah. Thank you, Frank. Yeah. I need to execute it. Excellent. So, frame 1. It's good to have someone clever here. So, let's just come back to here, come back to my folder. Here it is. And there's the ball, exactly the same as we had in Nuke. So if I now make a new camera, I can then just move this ball out of the way for a moment. If I take the camera, I can use a script here that's available. This was written by some guys at Digital Domain. And I'm just going to import that CHAN information. So here's our camera move 02. So I can open that and come back, and you can see if we set our frames to be the same, and if I remember, it was somewhere around frame 70. So I'm just going to set my scene here in Maya to frame 70 in length. If I then play that, you can see there is our animation data from Nuke. So what we could do is we could come in here now and we could call up our graph editor inside of Maya. And we could say, okay, in the rotation, we have no rotation at all. So let's just say in the Y rotation, I'm going to delete all this information here. I don't need it. And you can see in Nuke it baked out the data, putting keyframes at every key position. And here I'm just going to move across somewhere to the middle, and I'm going to do a rotation in Y. Okay, so let's just do a 90-degree rotation, and then at the end, let's just put it back again to 0, somewhere like that, and delete this key. So you can see we have now a camera rotation. There it goes. So we can now take our camera and we can now export that information back out as a CHAN file. So what it's doing now is it's basically baking the keyframes as part of this script. We can now choose where we want to put it. So I'm just going to come to here, and instead of calling it camera move, let's just call it something like, in fact, we'll choose it, and I'll just call it out of Maya, and it will be a CHAN file, and we nuke it. Sounds dodgy, but what can you do? So I can come back to my axis now. I can now import that information. So here's our out of Maya. I can bring this in, and you can see now we have that data doing the rotation and then back again. So it's very straightforward to be able to move data back and forth. So if you block out a camera move inside a Nuke, you could take it back into Maya, or I'm guessing Houdini or something similar, and make some changes, smarten it up a bit, and then bring it back into Nuke. So the integration is pretty tight. So I think that's probably everything I wanted to talk about. I think I'm probably a little bit ahead of time. That probably won't be too bad. See if there's anything I've missed. I don't think so. So should we hand over to questions and answers?
It's not on? Oh, it is now. So has anyone got any questions for Matt? Silence. Oh, there's one up there. Making me run around today. Where's that hand from? It's disappeared.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a question about FBX files. Can you export FBX files from a Nuke?
Not at the moment, but I believe they're probably planning to be able to do it sometime.
It's on the roadmap this year at some point.
All right.
Yeah, this year.
Okay.
They're looking at doing it this year.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions for Matt? Nobody.
Getting off lightly. That's good.
Lunch is not ready yet, Matt. You're going to have to spin this out. No more questions? Yep.
Can you export the focal length as a CHAN file, or is it just...
Can you export the focal length? I don't know whether you can in the version that we have at the moment. There's probably a chance Frank could probably write something that could do it, so I'm not committing him to that.
The question.
Can you add the focal length and similar information into the CHAN data?
The CHAN data, the native CHAN data only holds the vertical field of view, but in its simplicity, it's easy to take both the Nuke script that exports and imports the CHAN file and just add the columns you want, which is what we've been doing at DD for various shows. And we kind of sort of beefed it up to include anything that we wanted: focal length, horizontal aperture, vertical aperture, any sort of additional information. But out of the box, the CHAN file only contains transformation information, rotation, and a vertical field of view, which Nuke imports into converts into a focal length upon import. But it's all simple text files and really easy to customize. So in that case, it's actually quite nice to have a very, very simple file format.
Oh, thanks.
Any more?
Can you import primitives from PFTrack into Nuke?
Yeah, the PFTrack will export OBJ objects. So if you make a primitive inside of PF track, you can export that as an OBJ, and that will come in, hopefully positioned in the right place based on your point cloud data and the camera position. So yeah, it works well.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Scanning. No?
Get more time for lunch.
I don't know if lunch is ready yet.
I got a question.
You do.
Because you don't work for the Foundry, what doesn't work in the FBX stuff?
Everything works that I showed you. What would you like it to do?
Well, FBX traditionally doesn't work as beautifully as it could.
There are a few glitches. There are a few things that we've had to shift around a bit to try and get them to work. Exporting separate objects as individual FBX files works better than necessarily cramming everything into one place. But yeah, it seems to be reasonably okay, as long as you kind of learn the system and then the system works well.
Can I add to that? Hi. I was going to say, things we've found working with the latest FBX exporter from Autodesk is it's a lot better than previous ones, because Matt, you were using the latest FBX exporter from Maya. Really heavy scenes. There's, if you've got a lot of geometry and multiple bits of geometry in a single scene, can be a bit glitchy. Cameras are working much, much better. That was one of the things that was really, because you can always go back, because sometimes OBJ is a bit sort of tried and tested because you get the MTL file as well, and that could be a good thing. So sometimes you want to go back to OBJ for complex stuff. You can't do animated, like deforming objects in OBJ. That's not supported presently. So it's not that it doesn't work, it's just that it's not part of the spec. And I'm trying to think what else. Is there anything else? Lights, because the lights are different in Nuke, you don't want to be necessarily taking lights across because it's not going to necessarily replicate in any way how they relate to, say, just for example, Maya to Nuke. Have you anything else that you can think that's...
No, there's a script on high-end 3D that will let you export sequential OBJs out of Maya, animated ones at a per vertex level. So you could export a sphere changing shape, save it out as individual OBJs, and then call that in with the read geo node. And that works quite well.
Yeah,
it works very well.
There are certain things that I would go to OBJ for still, rather than FBX.
Yeah, I don't think FBX supports vertex movement yet.
Yeah, but you're not going to get motion blur anyway.
No.
So, yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Oh, one up there. I've got to run. I feel like Annika Rice. Not as thin though.
Thank you. Would you consider introducing back-to-texture nodes into Nuke just to speed up the processing when you do projections?
Foundry question.
Sorry, I didn't realise I was on. Hello? Sorry, I didn't realise I was on answering questions. Can you ask again? Sorry.
Sure. Would you consider introducing bake-to-texture nodes into Nuke just to speed up the pre-processing when you have a camera projection set up?
Oh, so that you can. Oh, okay, yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah, so you'd be able to bring in the textures pre-rendered, so that would be quicker.
No, sorry. I should have been more clear. Sorry.
Well, there's an example that if we have time I'll show today where basically, I don't know if you guys saw the FX Guide TV example for Justin from DD was showing where he was doing UV outputs from scanline render and then using that with 2D image processing tasks like warping and stuff for the mummy returns example. And that's similar to doing like a bake to texture in that you're outputting like a flat UV map which can then be used to retexture the object in UV space. And it is a little bit faster than having your projection running live through your scene. But the workflow, the workflow already exists to do that, so there's no real need to have a bake to texture as such. The question is whether you want to sacrifice interactivity for speed. So the example I have which we may or may not get time. It depends how fast Frank and I talk. Will sort of show that, but it's not. It's really a trade-off. It's often you don't want to have, like, for instance, Matt's scene was slowing down because there was multiple projections, UV projections going on, but you don't want to necessarily lock yourself into that, because then you get to the whole process of having to update a write node, update a read node. It's not as intuitive as you might want. So to answer the question in a very long way, I would suggest that you use the nodes that are already there, because you can output to UV, you can output spherically, which was what something will show with a lat long from a SkyDome later on. So the functionality's there already. It's just a question of workflow and adapting the workflow to the way that Nuke uses textures, rather than thinking about it as a 3D app way of doing things. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Cool.
Excellent.
Since we have time, just one thing to keep in mind, because you mentioned speed. The 2D transform system and the 3D transform system in Nuke actually work together. So even if you have a lot of 2D transforms to modify your incoming texture, and you use it then as either in UV space, or you project it through a camera onto a 3D object, the 3D and the 2D in that case actually concatenate, so you don't get a filter hit, and it's actually really fast. So baking out or unwrapping whatever you do texturing-wise in Nuke in the Skyline renderer to get an unwrapped UV map will potentially slow things down, and the quality hit is quite enormous. So I've found in my workflow that keeping things live tend to be actually faster, and not to mention the quality being a lot better.
Okay. Oh, there's a question.
Is there a clever way to avoid projecting through geometry, so you can only project your image on the outside, outward facing normals?
You can set the geometry on whether it's the read geo, which lets you import geometry, or if you make geometry, you can set front and back culling. So you could do it that way. So you could only project onto the front face or the back face. So you can do that. Yeah, it works very well. Yeah, the project node has front and back on it as well. So. As Tahl was saying a moment ago, all the projections that I was showing you from the Skyline renderer was outputting a perspective view or a camera view. You can also set that Skyline renderer to output the UV data, which I think you're going to show, aren't you, Tahl? Or the or spherical information. So the Skyline renderer has multiple styles of outputting the data that's in the 3D system. So that can be really useful. I think, yeah, Tahl will be showing you how that works later.
Okay.